I stood in the lobby of the building I dreamed about for 10 years, holding a key that should have unlocked my future. Instead, I watched my father hand it to my younger sister like it was a gift he'd bought himself. That was the moment I realized my family had never seen me as anything more than a placeholder for Tiffany's success. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start with betrayal. It starts with hope, the kind of stubborn, foolish hope that keeps you working 3 jobs while your family reminds you daily that you'll never amount to anything. I grew up in a middle-class family in Brooklyn, the kind where appearances mattered more than truth. My parents, Thomas and Eleanor Donovan, had built their entire identity around what the neighbors thought, what the relatives whispered, what strangers might assume when they saw us at church on Sundays. I was the older daughter, born with the unfortunate timing of arriving before they'd figured out how to mold a child into their perfect image. Tiffany came 5 years later, and by then, they'd had plenty of practice on me, learning what not to do. From the time I was 14, I knew I wasn't the favorite. It wasn't subtle. When I brought home a report card with 4 A's and 1 B, my father would frown at the B and ask why I couldn't be more like the Chen girl down the street who got straight A's and played violin. When Tiffany brought home 3 C's and 2 B's, they celebrated her effort and took her out for ice cream. I learned quickly that achievement meant nothing if you weren't the chosen one. At 16, I started working. Not because we needed the money, though my parents certainly enjoyed spending mine, but because I wanted something of my own. My first job was at a local diner, washing dishes for minimum wage. I'd come home smelling like grease and old coffee, and my mother would wrinkle her nose and tell me I was embarrassing the family with such degrading work. But I kept at it. I saved every penny I could hide from them, because even then, I knew I needed an escape plan. College was a joke in my house. My parents paid for Tiffany's education at a private university, the kind with ivy-covered walls and a campus that looked like a movie set. They paid for her sorority dues, her spring break trips, her textbooks and meal plans, and everything else she needed to live like a princess. For me, they said community college was good enough, that I should be grateful they were helping at all. They helped by letting me live at home while I worked full-time and took classes at night, watching Tiffany's Instagram posts about her fabulous life while I studied in a bedroom that still had my childhood furniture. The moment I graduated, I moved out. It wasn't dramatic. I just packed my things one afternoon while they were at Tiffany's sorority formal, left a note on the kitchen counter, and walked away. I rented a tiny studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood, the kind where you heard sirens every night and learned to ignore the sounds of arguments through thin walls. It was mine, though. Every crack in the ceiling, every rattling pipe, every suspicious stain on the carpet. Mine. That's when I met Ethan. I was working as a waitress at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan, the kind where Wall Street types came to impress clients and close deals. Ethan Vance came in one rainy Tuesday evening, soaked to the bone because he'd given his umbrella to a homeless woman outside. I brought him a towel and made a joke about chivalry being expensive in New York, and he laughed like I'd said the funniest thing he'd heard all year. We talked every time he came in after that. He was different from the other men in suits, the ones who snapped their fingers for service and left terrible tips. Ethan asked my name, remembered it, asked about my day like he actually cared about the answer. 3 months later, he asked me to dinner on my night off. 6 months after that, he proposed. My family's reaction to my engagement was predictably disappointing. My mother asked if I was pregnant. My father asked what Ethan did for a living, and when I told him Ethan was a venture capitalist, he laughed and said I must have gotten the job title wrong. Tiffany asked if Ethan had any cute friends, right in front of him, at our engagement dinner. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table and smiled like nothing bothered him, but I saw the muscle twitch in his jaw. We got married in a small ceremony at City Hall. My parents didn't come. They said they had a prior commitment to attend one of Tiffany's art gallery showings, the kind where she displayed paintings she'd bought from actual artists and claimed she'd created them herself. I wore a simple white dress I'd found on sale, held a bouquet of bodega flowers, and married the only person who'd ever looked at me like I was worth something. Ethan's parents flew in from Boston, and they cried happy tears and hugged me like I was already their daughter. It was the first time I'd felt like part of a real family. After the wedding, Ethan sat me down and asked me what I wanted. Not what my parents wanted, not what society expected, not what seemed practical. What I wanted. I told him the truth. I wanted security. I wanted a home that no one could take from me. I wanted to build something so solid, so undeniably mine, that no one could ever make me feel small again. He listened, really listened, and then he said something that changed everything. He said he'd help me get there, but it would be my achievement, my name on the documents, my success. He'd be the support system, the safety net, the partner who believed in me. But the victory would be mine alone, so we made a plan. Ethan taught me about investments, about real estate, about building wealth systematically. I kept working, kept saving, but now I had guidance, strategy, someone who knew how to turn my determination into tangible results. We lived modestly, far below our means, because every dollar I didn't spend was a dollar closer to my dream. For 10 years, I worked like a woman possessed. I went back to school and got my real estate license. I started investing in small properties, fixing them up, renting them out. I learned about market trends, about property values, about leverage and equity, and all the terms that used to intimidate me. Ethan was there every step, teaching me, encouraging me, celebrating every small win like it was a massive victory. My family didn't know any of this. To them, I was still the failure daughter, the one who'd barely scraped through community college and married someone who probably wasn't good enough for her. They didn't call unless they needed something. Money, usually. My mother would call crying about an unexpected expense, and I'd send her a few $100s because some pathetic part of me still wanted her approval. My father would mention casually that Tiffany needed a new laptop, a new car, a new anything, and I'd contribute because refusing felt like admitting I was as petty as they'd always claimed. Tiffany herself rarely spoke to me directly. She'd post on social media about her amazing family, tagging our parents and her friends and conveniently forgetting I existed. On the rare occasions we were in the same room, she'd look through me like I was furniture, addressing her comments to our parents while I stood right there. I learned to feel invisible, to expect nothing, to protect myself by caring less each year. But I never stopped working toward my goal. 10 years after I married Ethan, I did it. I found the perfect property, a 6-story building in a gentrifying neighborhood in Brooklyn. It had good bones but needed work, which kept the price lower than it should have been. I spent months analyzing the numbers, touring the property, imagining what it could become. The building had 12 residential units, commercial space on the ground floor, and enough potential to make my investment multiply. It was exactly what I'd been working toward. Ethan and I made the offer together, but the deed would be in my name only. That was important to me, and he understood why. When the offer was accepted, I cried for 3 hours straight. This wasn't just a building. This was proof. Proof that I could do something meaningful, something lasting, something no one could take away or diminish or give credit for to someone else. I decided to tell my family. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted them to finally see me, to acknowledge that I'd done something significant. Maybe I was still that little girl hoping for a proud smile from my father, a genuine compliment from my mother. Maybe I was just an idiot. I called my mother and told her I'd bought a property, that I wanted to show them. She sounded distracted, barely interested, but she agreed to come see it. She mentioned that Tiffany had been looking for a place to live, that maybe this property had a nice unit Tiffany could rent. I should have heard the warning in those words, but I was too excited to pay attention. The day I planned to show them the building, I arrived early. I wanted to walk through it alone one more time, to savor the moment before sharing it. The building was in decent shape considering its age, with high ceilings and original hardwood floors in most units. I'd already started planning renovations, imagining how each space could be transformed. I stood in the lobby, holding the master key, feeling like I'd finally made it. That's when my family arrived. My father walked in first, his expensive overcoat perfectly tailored, his expression already skeptical. My mother followed. Dripping in jewelry she'd convinced my father to buy her critical gaze sweeping the lobby like she was searching for flaws. Tiffany trailed behind them, her attention on her phone, her designer bag worth more than my first car. I smiled, nervous but excited. I started to explain the property, the investment, the plans I had for renovations. My father cut me off. He asked how much I'd paid. I told him. He laughed and said I'd overpaid, that I clearly didn't understand real estate. My mother asked who'd helped me, because surely I couldn't have managed this alone. Tiffany finally looked up from her phone and asked which unit was the nicest, because she was tired of her current apartment. I felt the excitement draining from my body, replaced by a familiar heaviness. This was how it always went. Nothing I did was ever good enough, impressive enough, worth their genuine interest. But I pushed through, trying to show them the best unit, the one I'd thought about keeping for myself before deciding to rent it out. We took the elevator to the 4th floor. The unit was beautiful, even in its current state. Large windows flooded the space with natural light. The layout was open and modern. I could see the potential so clearly, and I wanted them to see it too. My father walked through, his footsteps echoing on the bare floors, his expression unreadable. My mother made non-committal noises, touching surfaces like she was checking for dust. Tiffany walked straight to the window, looked out at the view, and said this place had potential. Then my mother said something that made my blood run cold. She said Tiffany should live here, that it would be perfect for her, that she deserved a nice place after all the stress of her recent breakup. My father agreed immediately, already pulling out his phone to call their accountant about arranging payments. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what was happening. This was my building, my investment, my achievement, and they were discussing giving it to Tiffany like it was a family decision, like I was just the real estate agent showing them properties. I finally found my voice. I said this wasn't their decision to make, that I'd bought this building, that Tiffany could apply to rent like anyone else if she was interested. My mother looked at me like I'd said something incomprehensible. She asked why I was being so selfish, so unwilling to help family. My father said I'd always been difficult, always resistant to doing the right thing for the people who'd raised me. Tiffany turned from the window and smiled at me, that same smile she'd used since we were children, the one that said she always got what she wanted and I should just accept it. She said she'd love to live here, that she'd even pay rent eventually, once she sorted out her finances. She said it like she was doing me a favor. Something inside me snapped. Not dramatically, not obviously. It was quiet, like a thread breaking deep inside where no one could see. I heard myself say no, clearly and firmly. I said this building was mine, that Tiffany couldn't live here, that this wasn't up for discussion. The argument that followed was vicious. My father called me ungrateful, selfish, a disgrace to the family. My mother cried, actual tears, saying she didn't understand how I could be so cruel to my own sister. Tiffany played the victim perfectly, her voice shaking as she said she'd never realized how much I hated her. I left them standing in that empty apartment and walked out. I got in my car and drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, tears blurring my vision. When I got home, Ethan took one look at my face and held me while I cried. I told him everything. He listened, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with anger he controlled for my sake. Then he asked me a question that changed everything. He asked if I was done letting them hurt me. He asked if I was ready to stand up for myself, really stand up, in a way that would end this pattern forever. He said he'd support whatever I decided, but that he was tired of watching people treat me like I was worthless. I thought about his question all night. I thought about all the years of being second best, of having my achievements dismissed, of being the family disappointment despite working harder than anyone else. I thought about how they'd tried to take this away from me too, this thing I'd worked 10 years to achieve. I thought about Tiffany's entitled smile and my mother's fake tears and my father's contemptuous tone. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I called my family and told them I'd reconsidered. I said they could come back to the building, that we needed to discuss Tiffany moving in. I could hear the smugness in my mother's voice when she agreed. They probably thought I'd caved, as usual, that I'd learned my place. They had no idea what was coming. The next day, I arrived at the building early again. But this time, I wasn't alone. Ethan was with me, and he'd brought our attorney, and he'd brought documents. So many documents. Deeds, contracts, financial records, everything that proved beyond any doubt that I owned this building, that it was mine completely, that no one had any claim to it but me. We waited in the lobby. The building's residents were starting to come and go, heading to work, walking dogs, living their lives in a space I now owned. I felt powerful in a way I'd never experienced before, standing there knowing that everything around me was mine, that I'd earned it, that no one could take it away. My family arrived right on time. They walked in like they owned the place, my father's voice loud and confident, my mother already talking about decorating ideas for Tiffany's new apartment. Tiffany herself was on her phone, probably already posting about her new place on Instagram. My father saw me and smiled, the kind of smile that said he was glad I'd come to my senses. He started to speak, probably to tell me how proud he was that I'd finally done the right thing. I didn't let him finish. I told them we needed to clarify something. I said there seemed to be some confusion about this property, about who owned it, about who had any say in what happened here. My mother made an impatient gesture, like I was wasting their time with irrelevant details. My father told me to get to the point, so I did. I told them that not only did I own this specific apartment unit, I owned the entire building, every apartment, every square foot of commercial space, the roof, the basement, the lobby where we stood, all of it, mine. The silence that followed was delicious. My father's face went blank with shock. My mother's mouth opened and closed without sound. Tiffany finally looked up from her phone, her perfectly shaped eyebrows drawing together in confusion. Then my father laughed. He actually laughed, like I'd told a joke. He said that was impossible, that I couldn't afford a building like this, that I must be confused about the paperwork. My mother agreed, her voice pitying, saying I probably only owned one unit and had gotten mixed up. That's when Ethan stepped forward. I'd told Ethan he didn't need to come, that I could handle this myself, but he'd insisted, not because he thought I couldn't do it alone, but because he wanted to watch me win. He'd been my silent partner in this journey, the person who believed in me when no one else did, and he wanted to witness the moment I finally got the recognition I deserved. Ethan introduced himself, though they'd met him before at our wedding. They dismissed him then as probably working some mediocre job, not worth their attention. His voice was calm, professional, as he explained that he was indeed a venture capitalist, that his firm managed a portfolio worth hundreds of millions, and that he'd been honored to watch his wife build her own real estate empire over the past decade. My mother's face paled. My father's expression shifted from amusement to something harder to read. Tiffany stared at Ethan like she was seeing him for the first time. Ethan continued. He explained that I'd been investing in real estate for years, that I'd built a substantial portfolio, that this building was the culmination of a decade of hard work and smart decisions. He laid out the documents on the lobby table, one by one. The deed, with my name clearly listed as the sole owner. The mortgage paperwork, showing the property was paid in full. The LLC documents, showing my property management company. The tax records, the insurance policies, everything. My father picked up the deed with trembling hands. I watched him read it, watched the color drain from his face as he realized it was real. My mother made a small sound, almost like a whimper. Tiffany just stood there, frozen, her phone hanging limply in her hand. I let the silence stretch. I wanted them to feel it, to understand the magnitude of what I'd achieved, while they'd been ignoring me, dismissing me, treating me like I was nothing. Finally, my father spoke. He asked how this was possible. His voice was different now, smaller, confused. He asked how I could have afforded this. He asked if Ethan had bought it for me. I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. I explained that I'd done it myself, that Ethan had taught me and guided me, but that every investment decision had been mine, that every dollar had been earned by me, that this success was mine alone. I reminded him of all the times he'd told me I'd never amount to anything, that I was the disappointment daughter, that Tiffany was the one with potential. I told him he'd been wrong. My mother tried to recover. She put on that fake sweet voice she used when she wanted something, saying of course she'd always believed in me, that she'd always known I had it in me. She said she was proud of me, that we should celebrate. She suggested we all go to dinner, her treat. I laughed. I actually laughed, and it felt good. I told her I didn't need her pride now, that I'd needed it when I was working 3 jobs to pay for community college while she paid for Tiffany's sorority dues. I told her I'd needed her support when I was living in that studio apartment with the broken heat, not now when I owned an entire building. Tiffany finally found her voice. She asked, in that whiny tone she'd perfected, why I was being so mean. She said we were family, that I should be happy to help her. She actually said she deserved to live here more than anyone else because she'd had such a hard year. I looked at my little sister, this woman who'd been handed everything and appreciated nothing, and I felt nothing but pity. I told her she could apply to rent an apartment like anyone else, that she'd need first and last month's rent plus a security deposit, that she'd need proof of income and references, and that her application would be judged on the same criteria as everyone else's. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. She turned to our parents, waiting for them to fix this, to make me do what they wanted, like they always had. But for once, they were speechless. My father tried one more time. He drew himself up, trying to reclaim some authority, and told me I was making a mistake. He said family should take care of family, that I owed them after everything they'd done for me. He said if I didn't help Tiffany, I'd regret it. I'd been waiting for this. I'd prepared for it. I pulled out another document, one Ethan and I had prepared with our attorney. I handed it to my father and told him to read it carefully. It was a cease and desist letter, a legal notice that any further harassment, any attempts to claim ownership or rights to my property, any defamatory statements about me or my husband would result in a lawsuit. I watched my father read it, watched the realization hit him that this wasn't a family drama anymore. This was legal. This was real. This was me, finally wielding power instead of just enduring pain. My mother started crying, real tears this time, not the manipulative kind. She asked how I could do this to them, how I could be so cruel. She said she'd given me life, raised me, sacrificed for me. She made it sound like I owed her everything, like my entire existence was a debt I could never repay. I was done listening. I told them they had 2 choices. They could respect my boundaries, treat me with the dignity I deserved, and have a limited but cordial relationship with me. Or they could continue trying to manipulate me, use me, and take from me, in which case they'd have no relationship with me at all. I told them to decide and let me know through my attorney. Then I turned and walked toward the elevator. Ethan followed, along with our lawyer. Behind us, I could hear my mother's voice rising, my father demanding we come back, Tiffany calling me names I won't repeat. I didn't turn around. I didn't engage. I just kept walking. As the elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of them standing in the lobby, looking lost and small and confused. For the first time in my life, they were the ones feeling powerless. For the first time, I was the one walking away. The next few weeks were hard. My parents called constantly, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry to pleading. They tried to guilt me, remind me of family obligations, make me feel like a terrible person for setting boundaries. Tiffany posted cryptic messages on social media about fake people and family betrayal. Some relatives I barely knew called to tell me I should forgive and forget, that family was everything. But Ethan was there. His parents, who'd always treated me like their own daughter, were there. My friends, the real ones who'd watched me struggle and grow, were there. They reminded me that I wasn't wrong, that I wasn't cruel, that I had every right to protect myself from people who only wanted to use me. I threw myself into renovating the building. Each unit got updated with modern kitchens, new bathrooms, refinished floors. The commercial space became a trendy coffee shop and a boutique art gallery. I hired a property management company to handle the day-to-day operations, but I was involved in every decision. This was my project, my vision, and I wanted it to be perfect. 3 months after that confrontation in the lobby, the building was fully renovated and rented out. The property value had increased significantly, and the rental income exceeded my projections. I'd done it. I'd taken a risk, trusted my judgment, and succeeded. That's when my parents showed up again. I was at the building, meeting with the coffee shop owner about some equipment issues. When they walked in, they looked different, somehow. Older, tired. My father's hair seemed grayer. My mother's designer clothes looked less impressive in the morning light. They asked if we could talk. I almost said no. Every instinct told me to protect myself, to maintain the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. But something made me hesitate, some small part of me that still wondered if maybe, finally, they'd understood. We sat in the coffee shop, at a corner table. The owner, who'd come to know me well, brought us coffee and gave me a questioning look. I nodded to show I was okay. The door was right there if I needed to leave. My father spoke first. He said they'd had time to think, that they'd talked to a family therapist, that they were starting to understand how they'd treated me. He admitted they'd favored Tiffany, that they'd taken me for granted, that they'd been wrong. He said he was sorry. My mother echoed his apology. She said she'd always been threatened by my independence, that she'd tried to keep me small because she was afraid of me surpassing her. She admitted she'd lived vicariously through Tiffany, treating her like the daughter she wished she'd been. She said watching me succeed without their help had forced her to confront some painful truths about herself. I sat there, coffee going cold in my hands, listening to words I'd wanted to hear for decades. Part of me wanted to accept the apology, to repair the relationship, to finally have the parents I'd always dreamed of. But another part of me, the part that had learned hard lessons about self-protection, was more cautious. I asked them why they were really here. My father looked uncomfortable. He admitted that watching me succeed had made them realize they'd backed the wrong horse, so to speak. Tiffany had moved back in with them after her apartment lease ended. She had no job, no prospects, no ambition beyond finding someone to take care of her. They'd finally seen what I'd always known, that they'd created a spoiled, entitled person who couldn't function independently. I asked if they expected me to fix that for them. My mother was quick to say no, that they weren't asking for anything. But I could see it in their eyes, the hope that maybe I'd offer help, that maybe I'd be the solution to the problem they'd created. I finished my coffee and stood up. I told them I appreciated the apology, that I believed they were sincere, but that sorry wasn't enough. Sorry didn't erase decades of pain. Sorry didn't repair the damage to my self-esteem, the years I'd spent feeling worthless, the constant pressure to accept crumbs while Tiffany got everything. I said if they wanted a relationship with me, it would be on my terms. They'd need to continue therapy, both individually and as a family. They'd need to respect my boundaries without guilt trips or manipulation. They'd need to acknowledge that Tiffany's problems were not my responsibility. They'd need to accept that I might never fully trust them again, and that was a consequence of their choices, not my failure. My father nodded slowly. My mother wiped her eyes. They asked if I could forgive them someday. I said maybe, but that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean going back to how things were. It meant moving forward differently, with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. They left after that, and I sat in my coffee shop, in my building, feeling the weight of that conversation. It hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been a fairy tale reconciliation, but it had been honest, and that was something. Over the next year, my parents did try. They went to therapy. They stopped calling with demands disguised as requests. They invited me to dinner occasionally, and when I declined, they accepted it without making me feel guilty. They started treating me with something resembling respect, though it was clear they still didn't fully understand why their past behavior had been so damaging. Tiffany, on the other hand, never apologized. She cut contact with me completely, which was honestly a relief. I heard through the family grapevine that she'd moved to Los Angeles, chasing some new dream that would inevitably fizzle out when she realized success required actual work. I wished her well from a distance and didn't think about her much. As for me, I kept building my empire. I bought 2 more properties, then 3. I started a consulting business, teaching other women how to invest in real estate. Ethan and I bought a brownstone in Park Slope, renovated it ourselves, and made it into a home filled with light and laughter. We talked about having kids someday, but for now, we were happy just being partners in every sense of the word. Sometimes, late at night, I'd stand on the roof of my building and look out over Brooklyn. I'd think about that scared girl working in a diner, believing her family's assessment that she'd never be anything special. I'd think about all the times I'd almost given up, almost accepted their version of who I was, and I'd think about how wrong they'd been. The building beneath my feet wasn't merely real estate, wasn't simply steel and concrete and glass rising into the Brooklyn sky. It was something far more profound, far more personal. It was tangible, irrefutable proof that I was capable of extraordinary things, Proof that I possessed a strength I'd been told for years I didn't have. Proof that I could construct something enduring and magnificent from nothing but raw determination, unwavering stubbornness, and a refusal to accept the limitations others had tried to impose upon me. Every floor, every beam, every carefully negotiated contract represented a piece of evidence that contradicted the narrative my family had written about me since childhood. This building was proof that their opinion of me had never been the truth. It had only ever been a reflection of their own limitations, their inability to see beyond their narrow prejudices and preconceived notions about who I was supposed to be. They had looked at me and seen someone small, someone forgettable, someone destined to fade into the background while my sister claimed every spotlight. But they had been wrong. Catastrophically, completely wrong. And now I had 53 floors of architectural achievement to prove it. I named the building the Donovan Tower, not after my family, not as some gesture of reconciliation or attempt to honor the people who had diminished me at every turn. No, I named it after myself. After the woman I had fought to become, the one who refused to stay small, no matter how many times she was told to shrink. The one who battled for every single inch of success, who clawed her way up from nothing with bloodied fingernails and gritted teeth. The one who learned, slowly and painfully, that the only approval I truly needed, the only validation that actually mattered, was my own. My parents, predictably, hated the name with a passion that was almost comical in its intensity. They said it was presumptuous, arrogant, that I was stealing the family name for my own glory, appropriating something that didn't belong to me alone. My mother's voice had been shrill with indignation when she called. My father's email had been cold and formal, filled with accusations of selfishness and suggestions that I was embarrassing the family with my audacity. I told them, with a clarity and confidence that surprised even me, that yes, that was exactly what I was doing. I was stealing the name. I was reclaiming it. I was taking something that had been used as a weapon against me my entire life and transforming it into something that represented strength, independence, resilience, and achievement instead of manipulation, favoritism, and conditional love. The Donovan Tower would stand for everything they had tried to prevent me from becoming. It would be a daily, towering reminder that I had transcended their expectations and exceeded every boundary they had attempted to construct around my life. Ethan stood beside me on the rooftop that evening, his arm draped protectively around my shoulders as we looked out over the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple and gold, and the city below was beginning to twinkle with a million lights. He asked me, his voice gentle and without judgment, if I had any regrets about the path I'd taken, about the choices I'd made, about the bridges I'd burned. I thought about it honestly, taking the question seriously rather than brushing it off with a quick, defensive response. I thought about the years of pain, the sleepless nights, the moments of crushing doubt. I thought about the family relationships that would never be fully healed, the wounds that had scarred over but would never completely disappear. I thought about my sister, somewhere in the city with her perfect life and her oblivious privilege, and how we would probably never speak again, how we would become strangers who once shared a childhood. I thought about holidays that would forever be awkward, about family gatherings I would continue to avoid, about the fact that my future children, if I had them, would grow up with barely knowing their grandparents. I thought about all of it, letting myself feel the weight of those losses without flinching away from them. And then I told Ethan no. I didn't regret any of it. Not a single painful moment, not one difficult decision, not any of the sacrifices I'd made along the way. Because all of it, every heartbreak and every triumph, every moment of despair and every surge of determination, had made me who I was. It had forged me in fire, had shaped me into someone I was genuinely proud to be. The pain had taught me resilience, had shown me that I could endure things I never thought possible and emerge stronger on the other side. The rejection had taught me self-reliance, had forced me to develop an inner strength that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or support. The betrayal, particularly my sister's unconscious cruelty and my parents' blatant favoritism, had taught me to value the people who actually loved me for who I was, to recognize the profound difference between family by blood and family by choice. I'd built an empire from nothing but spite and determination, from anger and ambition, and a burning need to prove everyone wrong. And that empire, this building beneath my feet, had given me something infinitely more valuable than money or professional success or the ability to look down on the people who had looked down on me. It had given me myself back, had restored the part of me I'd almost lost to their constant diminishment, their relentless message that I was less than, other than, never quite enough. Looking out over the city, feeling Ethan's steady, comforting presence beside me, standing on top of the building I owned completely and absolutely, with no partners to answer to and no investors who could take it away, I finally understood what it truly meant to be free. Not free from my past, because that would always be part of me, woven into the fabric of who I was. The scars would always be there, faint but permanent. But I was free from the power that past had over me, free from the belief that their assessment of my worth was accurate or meaningful, free from the desperate, exhausting need for their approval. I'd spent 10 years building this tower, brick by brick, investment by investment, sacrifice by sacrifice. 10 years of working 16-hour days, of saying no to vacations and easy paths, of making difficult choices and taking calculated risks. 10 years of learning and growing and becoming someone I never imagined I could be. But what I'd really built, I realized in that moment of clarity on the rooftop, wasn't a building at all. It was so much more than that. I'd built a life where I mattered, where my voice carried weight, where my opinions were respected and my ideas were valued. I'd built a life where my choices were my own, where I answered to no one but myself, where I could wake up each morning and decide who I wanted to be that day. I'd built a life where I was surrounded by people who loved me for my strength rather than tolerating me despite my supposed weaknesses. I'd built a life worth living, a life I was proud of, a life that was authentically, unapologetically mine. And standing there, with Ethan's hand finding mine and squeezing gently, with the city lights spreading out below us like a constellation of stars that had fallen to earth, with the cool evening breeze carrying the sounds of traffic and distant voices and all the life happening in the streets below, I knew with absolute certainty that no one, not my parents with their disappointment and their conditional love, not my sister with her oblivious privilege and her unexamined advantages, not anyone in the world could ever take this away from me. Because I hadn't just bought a building, hadn't simply acquired another piece of property to add to my portfolio. I'd bought my freedom, had purchased my independence, had invested in my own worth and my own future. And that was absolutely priceless. That was worth every tear I'd cried, every doubt I'd overcome, every moment of loneliness and uncertainty I'd endured. That was worth everything. The Donovan Tower stands in Brooklyn today, a testament to everything I overcame, every obstacle I conquered, every person who underestimated me and lived to see how wrong they were. It rises into the sky like a declaration, like a statement carved in steel and glass that cannot be ignored or dismissed. When people ask about the name, when they inquire about the history behind the Donovan Tower, I tell them the truth. I tell them it's named after a woman who refused to stay small when everyone around her insisted she should. A woman who turned pain into power, who transformed hurt into determination, who channeled rage into ambition. A woman who built something beautiful and enduring from the ashes of a broken family and the fragments of a shattered childhood. I tell them it's named after me. And for the first time in my life, for the first time since I was a little girl who believed she was worthy of love and attention before the world taught her otherwise, I say that with pride. Pure, uncomplicated, well-earned pride. The kind of pride that doesn't need external validation because it comes from knowing, deeply and completely, who you are and what you've accomplished. The kind of pride that no one can give you and no one can take away. The kind of pride that comes from owning your story, all of it, the painful parts and the triumphant ones, and recognizing that every chapter made you who you are today. The Donovan Tower is my monument, my legacy, my proof, and every day, when I walk through its doors, I'm reminded that I am enough. I always was.